interpreting Proverbs. Interpreting Proverbs. Under this section, we shall be looking at outline of the book of Proverbs. So under the outline of the book, we will be talking about the author of the book or authors of the book, structure of the book, and the classification of the 31 chapters of the book. So we'll be looking at that under the outline. And number two, we also define Proverbs. We look at the definition of Proverbs. And number three, we we can also look at the writing style of the book, the writing style of the book of Proverbs. Basically, that is talking about the use of parallelism. So the book of Proverbs makes use of what we call parallelism. When we get there, you will understand. So the book of Proverbs contains timeless wisdom expressed through Hebrew poetry. This presentation will explore how to properly interpret these ancient sayings by understanding their structure, patterns, and literary techniques. Structure of the book of Proverbs. So, number one, preparation of the heart, chapters 1 to 9. Number two, application of the hands, chapter, chapter 10 to chapter 31. So, in other words, the book of Proverbs contains 31 chapters. So, the 31 chapters are now divided into two. Chapter 1 to chapter 9 is put under the preparation of the heart. Like that, the summary of the message, the central message of what chapter 1 to chapter 9 is saying, the preparation of the heart. And the central message of chapter 10 to chapter 31 is the application of the end of our hands. So that is the knowledge you have, they have to apply it. The book of Proverbs can be outlined as follows. Number one, preparation of the heart, Proverbs 1 to Proverbs 9. Introduction. So under the preparation of the heart, so I'm just giving you the brief outline of the book. We have introduction, that is from chapter 1 verse 1. Then B, you have choose wisdom from 1 chapter 1 verse 8 downward. Then you have sermon of compassion, chapter 4. Then we have OD to wisdom, that is Proverbs chapters 8 and 9. So I'm not going to dwell on that. If you really want to study the outline of the book of Proverbs, that means you have to maybe enroll for the survey of the book of the Old Testament. Under the survey of the Old Testament, you are going to treat all the books under the Old Testament, and you are going to know the historical context, so the outline that I just talked about, so the doctrinal contribution of the book, and some other things in under the survey of the Old Testament, or survey of the New Testament, or surveys of the old Bible. So now, number two, application of the end, Proverbs chapter 10 to 31. So A, 375 Proverbs of Solomon. So now this is talking about different collections of the books of Proverbs now. So chapter 10 from verse 1 to chapter 22 verse 16. So there is a compilation of 375 Proverbs of Solomon. So what you have from chapter 10, Proverbs chapter 10 verse 1 to Proverbs chapter 22 verse 16 is 375 Proverbs of Solomon. Then B, 30 sayings of the wise. 30 sayings of the wise. That is from chapter 22 verse 17 to chapter 24 verse 34. So that is the proverbs that are compiled there are called sayings of the wise. These compilation, some people believe that the author is anonymous, or the authors are anonymous, but some also still attribute this proverb to Solomon. So I'm talking about the sayings of the wise, Proverbs 22 to Proverbs 24. Proverbs 22 from verse 17 to Proverbs 24 to verse 34. Then C, 140 Proverbs compiled by Hezekiah, by men of Hezekiah. So by men of King Hezekiah. So men of King Hezekiah compiled, so they are proverbs. So 140 proverbs. So the compilation of these proverbs is what we have in chapter 25 to chapter 29. When I say 140 40 proverbs, I'm not talking about 140 chapters. So I think you understand what I'm saying. It is later that those things are put in chapter and verses. I'm saying that 140 wise sayings. So that is what is contained in Proverbs chapter 25 to 29. So D, sayings of Agor, that is Proverbs chapter 30, sayings of Agor, that is the wisdom of Agor. Then Proverbs 31, that is the song of King Lemon. So that is Proverbs chapter 31. As you study this book, keep it in mind which section you are in and the basic intent of that section. So, of course, with what I've just given to you now, you now know that the author or the book of Proverbs is not just Solomon. So, with the outline I've just given you now, so maybe I should quickly give you the different collections of the book of Proverbs. So, the first collection, there are about 7 collections of the book of Proverbs. 7 collections. When I say collection, there are different collection of books. So, and there are 7. It is those 7 collections that form the whole 31 chapters of the book of Proverbs. So, the first collection is from chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 9, verse 18, written by Solomon. The second collection is from chapter 10, verse 1 to chapter 22, verse 16. That is second collection, written by Solomon. Third collection is from chapter 22, 17 to 24. Then chapter 22, verse 17 to chapter 24, verse 22. That is anonymous. That's what I call the wise saying the other time. So the sayings of the wise, the sayings of the wise. So number 4 is also anonymous. The author is anonymous. That is chapter 24, verse 23 to verse 34. Verse 23 to verse 34. So the fifth collection, that is the men of Hezekiah. Men of Hezekiah. Some people still attribute it to Solomon. So you can say Solomon or men of, but it is popularly credited, attributed to men of Hezekiah. That is Proverbs 25, verse 1 to Proverbs chapter 29 to verse 27. Then Proverbs 30 from verse 1 to verse 33. That is Agor. The author is Agor. Then Lemuel, King Lemuel, that is the written by, I'm talking about Proverbs 31 is written by King Lemuel. So those are the 7 collections of the books of Proverbs. So the 7 collections of the book of Proverbs. All right. So let's go to the next slide. What is a Proverbs? No, I'm done now with the outline of the book of Proverbs. So we want to look at the meaning of Proverbs now. A proverb is a brief, popular witticism, a specific illustration to signify a universal truth about life. So cultural examples. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That is a general proverb. So every culture has their own proverb. Like in Nigeria, Yoruba they have their own, Hausa, Igbo have their own. So Jewish people, the Hebrews, they also have their own. So remember what a proverb is. A proverb is a brief, popular witticism, a specific illustration to signify a universal truth about life. We have many in every culture. For example, a bird. Okay, I think I've read this already. All right, let's go to the next slide. Hebrew poetry structure. So Hebrew poetry structure, and you need to really pay attention now. Please, excuse me. Hebrew poetry structure. Number 1, 2-line structure. Each statement is structured in only 2 lines. Each statement is structured in only 2 lines. For example, Proverbs 16:28. A perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separate friends. So it is always structured in two lines. Can you see the first line here? A perverse man spread strife. The second line is slanderer separate friends. Number two, so the parallel meaning. Instead of rhyme, Hebrew poetry seek to create a parallel meaning. No, normally, generally speaking, when you are talking about poem or poetry, so they make use of what we call rhyme. But the Hebrew poetry, instead of making use of rhyme, they make use of parallel meaning, parallelisms. So, and I'm going to be giving us different types of uh, parallelisms as being used in the book of Proverbs. Number three, corresponding part. There are generally two or three parts to each line, and this part of the first line corresponds to the part of the second line. For example, okay, now in the Bible, Proverbs are written as Hebrew poetry. Hebrew poetry has the following characteristics. Each statement is structured only in two lines. So this is a repetition of what I've said over there. So, all right, let's go to the next slide. It's just a repetition of what I've said. Examples of parallel structure now. Examples of parallel structure. Example 1, Proverbs 16:28. A perverse man spread strife, and a slanderer separate friends. This is an example of parallel structure. Example 2. The plans of the diligent lead surely to success, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. So that is what they call rhyme. You see the first line, you see the second line. You see the first line, you see the second line. So the second line is parallel to the first line, or the second line is parallel to the first line. So there are three parts in each line. Each parallel each parallel a thought in the other line. Let me repeat that. There are three parts in each line. Each parallels a thought in the other line. Unlike the last example, this proverb gives a contrast, not a repeat of the idea. I'm still going to explain of that. The three parts are not necessarily in the same order in both lines. So I'm going to explain that very shortly. Now, three main patterns of parallelism. So you will understand it better now. Three main patterns of parallelisms. Synonymous parallel. That's the first one. The second one, contrasting parallel. Then the third one is what we call synthetic parallel. I'm going to explain them one after the other now. So the first line and the second line say the same thing. In synonymous parallel, the first line say the same things as the first line. The second line say the same thing as the first line. A perverse man spread strife, and the slanderer separate friends. Is the same thing. Though uses different something like different analogy, but it's saying the same thing. So they say the same thing. So that's what we call synonymous parallel. Now, contrasting parallel. The second line is a contrast to the first line. Example, Proverbs 21 verse 5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to success, but everyone who is hasty comes to poverty. Everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. You see, the first line talks about success. The second line talks about poverty. The first line talks about the diligent, but the second line talks about somebody who is hasty. So you can see that the second line is a kind of contradiction or contrasting the first line. And that is why we call it contrasting parallel. So these are the things you will come across mostly in the book of Proverbs. And also, you have things like that also in the book of Psalms. So synonymous parallel, contrasting parallel. So then we now have what we call synthetic parallel. The second line adds an additional thought to the first line. The second line adds an additional thought to the first line. Example, Proverbs 60 verse 4. God has made everything for a purpose, yet even the wicked for the day of evil. So the second line give additional information to the first line. The second line give additional information to the first line. That is synthetic parallel. That is synthetic parallel. Now in synonymous parallel, now though you have two analogy there, it's not saying different things. So don't just interpret the first line and you now interpret the second line like as if the second line is saying a different thing. It's a synonymous parallel. The message is the same. The message is the same. So contrasting parallel, of course, the message is the same, but the style of that writing wants you to see the opposite of what the first line says. So what the first line says, the plan of the diligent leads surely to success. So in other words, if you want to be successful, you must be diligent. So the opposite of that is if you want success hastily. In other words, that success will not come hastily. Despite the fact that you are diligent, that does not mean your success will come hastily. You still have to be patient. Otherwise, if you want to be hasty, you will also come to poverty. So, what am I saying? The message is always the same. The message is always the same, but most time, Proverbs makes use of different kinds of parallelisms. So, creating your own Hebrew poetry, synonymous parallel. What will be a synonymous parallel for the following line? So, this is class work now. Pastors care for their congregations. So, of course, the answer has been supplied. You understand? But in the original manuscript, you have dash here. Pastors care for their congregation. Dash, watch over their flocks. Of course, the answer is shepherd, watch over their flocks. So that is synonymous parallel. So see contrasting parallel. Let's try to write another of our own. On a hot day, the drinking fountain is always busy. But when it is cool, no one stops for water. So when it is cool, dash. So you I will have asked you to finish it. But when it is cool, no one stop for water. That is contrasting parallel. So then synthetic parallel. Let's try writing out our own synthetic parallel. Pastors can learn how to make disciples on their own over many years, but from experienced mentors, you can quickly learn what many others have discovered. So that is synthetic parallel. So that is to give you another example. So summary of parallelism type. Synonymous. Both lines say the same thing. Contrast the second line introducing an opposite thought. Then thought synthetic. The second line adds an additional idea to the first line. And so in this style of Hebrew poetry, you find three primary styles: synonymous, contrast, and synthetic.